This is Jeremy Zwinger with the Rice Trader, just doing our weekly summary as always. We're going to start a little bit differently than most weeks, and I'm going to show you a poster board. And just to show you that rice is also looked at in the U.S., this is my 9-year-old daughter's project, where she goes through rice, and I quite like it actually. And it talks about how it's grown and where it goes. You know, it's quite interesting in the local area that even U.S. children look at where the products are grown and how the whole life cycle goes. But I think she did a heck of a job, and she kind of promoted the world rice industry. So I actually have this in our local conference room, and I quite like it. So, you know, I really enjoy the education of rice from younger to older ages. So it's a nice little boom for when she brought this home last week. So with that, it is getting more holiday time for us all, especially in California, where locally we dealt with these fires and a lot of trauma, just many people we know, as it's affected our local area significantly. As we get close to the end of this year, it surely added a change than we expected, which is kind of what you're seeing also in the U.S., just to start here. It's a very, very volatile time. We had a shift in Congress, as we predicted, where now you're going to have a Democratic Congress starting in January, a House and a Republican Senate. And of course, President Trump is Republican, so you'll have a very split, and it's going to be a very chaotic, very, very chaotic year, I have a feeling. But we did get a lame duck, which is what we call in the U.S. when there's an election and there's leaving members. It's called lame duck session. We did get the Farm Bill, which is a huge thing to look at in the Rice Trader, and to understand what that means to you as rice players throughout the world, because the subsidies for rice are immense, and it's gonna dramatically affect U.S. acres. It's gonna affect the ability for soybeans to compete in the southern U.S. It's definitely gonna push up rice acres significantly in the U.S., and there's gonna be a guarantee to the growers, much like what happened in Thailand, much like what happened in China, where you give these support prices. This is going to affect the U.S. system. Now, and again, the details, as much what we'll talk about, are much more in depth in the Rice Trader. On the other flip side, what hasn't gotten done is even more important. As we've been predicting, there's been risk on NAFTA. And NAFTA, the new NAFTA, is not passed. And if it is not passed in this lame duck session, it will not be passed. And there is a very few days left in this year. I think it's only four more days of business in Washington, D.C. before they break until the new session. If it does not get passed, there's a new president in Mexico. We talked about the U.S. split. It'll be extremely difficult for the current language to be passed after it goes to the new session. I think they'd have to scrap the whole thing. You've had the U.S. president also threaten he will pull out of the former agreements to try to force a deal. So it is a very volatile time in this region, which could destabilize things. Now, again, what's the other thing? I also see a lot of positive signs in the U.S.-China trade war. You've seen some soybean buying. You've seen China pull off some threats of tariffs. You've seen the U.S. take a few steps back. It's definitely going through the political process of stabilization, as both sides give a little, both sides give a little bit. But it's also extremely volatile. And for U.S. and rice in China, it's basically killed all funding. Funding has been decreased dramatically, and they just decided that Chinese is not a big opportunity for the U.S. rice. And of course, as they have 95 million metric tons of storage and want to sell 30 to 40 million tons, one would expect that. There's not a lot of opportunity to send rice to China, from the U.S. especially, with their very odd system. So let's kind of move more broadly. We started oddly with the U.S. and a lot of things happening here. More broadly, I would just say it's very interesting that for the first time in an extremely long time, you do have all the major origins below $400 per ton. The lowest, of course, remains Pakistan, which dropped $5 and it's $355 per ton. But you did see Thai go from $392 to $390, and the big one was Vietnam, which went from $405 to $395. A lot of this is knowing what the actual amounts were in the NFA tenders, and it being perceived in the market that this was already covered. So as we move forward in this, you have less China buying, but China remains to be buying in the market. But the market's starting to see that we have good trade with China continuing to export heavily into all these markets. It's just causing a lot of issues because food supplies are just so high. You know, we've talked about it week after week after week. This is the highest food supply globally for rice and other products since 2000. It's just going to pressure this system. Made worse again by the U.S. As much as it's a small piece, these subsidies are going to dramatically increase the potential crop in the U.S. unless soybeans runs through the roof and corn and wheat maybe would run through the roof and take a little bit of acres. So I just see large amounts of supplies and growing stocks globally and in a weaker market as we move forward. You know, a lot of the major economists, including Nathan Childs from USDA and Wiesmeyer from Informa, have now calling the market down for 4 to 5 years, which is what we've been saying for about 18 months. And we were very aggressive on stage at the World Conference saying this. It's a lot of confirmation for just a feel that the market's going through a very negative cycle for food, which could change on major food events, of course. What else are the key things I would say this week? I almost move back to the U.S. market. I find it very fascinating. In addition to this talk of increased crops, we did a very nice report on Mexico this week, which shows what we've been indicating, that the U.S. has been losing massive market share. And in fact, for the first time in decades upon decades upon decades, the U.S. was below 70% market share. It once held a 99.5% market share for a trade of rice into Mexico. It's at 69% today, which is dramatic and something to look at very clearly. Beyond that, you do need to look at what acres are going to be next year. You know, we have a very good acreage summary in the TRT this week. There's also going through the USDA data and their perceptions on different things. So there's a lot in the Rice Trader this week in addition to those reports. We also have a TRT versus USDA. So it's just a very long report in addition to monthly updates in the data in Pakistan. Just as we get close to ending, I would just say one must look at also the japonica market. It's almost dichotomous right now. You're definitely going to have an increase in acres in California as long as the weather holds up. It's been rather wet so far. On the flip side, you had the Australian crop come in much lower than many expected. We knew that the lack of rains, therefore, were going to actually affect the coming crop. But it's a bit surprising with some of the numbers USDA are saying, only 100,000 tons. This needs to be watched a little closer. You know, added to that, you know, what we expected, Egypt has been buying, you know, there's the Egyptian tender, and it looks like all of that went to China. There was a sample that was approved from Vietnam for medium grain, but it seems like all of it went to this massive amount of rice that China is looking to export. And this will continue, even though you have some supply reductions in Australia. The amount of total japonica rice is just massive, which is made actually worse by the rice in the southern U.S. as well. And so higher quality that's a little bit less of. I've actually heard good things about some of the quantity out of Vietnam and China that's actually pretty high quality. So it's less clear how much high quality rice there is, but it's definitely a fascinating market. You know, it's a busy week for the Rice Trader. There's a lot of information. I think I gave a good summary of the key pieces, but the report is much, much more in depth. With that, this is just going to sign off on the December 17th TRT report. Appreciate your time, and you guys have a nice weekend.